Welcome to Adventures in Fermentation. I'm Dr. Johnny Drain, and each week I talk with scientists and chefs, artists and oddballs, thinkers and tinkerers about the alchemy of microbes. This week I welcome Jeremy Umansky, chef, author, and one of the world's leading voices in the art and science of Koji fermentation. Jeremy, of course, is the co-author of Koji Alchemy, a modern cult classic among chefs, bartenders, and fermentation obsessives. Jeremy is the chef and co-owner of Larder in Cleveland, Ohio. Jeremy, welcome.
Oh, thank you. It's a little hot here, but I'm blushing.
It's all true. I mean, I didn't even talk about your James Beard Award nominations, and you were trained at the Culinary Institute of America, if I'm not
I
mistaken.
was.
That's where you started off, right?
Yeah. Arguably it goes back further. By the time I was in my early teens, so we'll try to condense the story, but I had gotten my sister feeder mice as a gift, and they were making babies, and the pet store would buy the babies back.
Right, to
And
feed to snakes or lizards.
yeah, exactly. So I was getting into insects. I was like, as a kid, I would catch praying mantises and all this stuff. And I heard people eat insects, and the pet store had mealworms and crickets. So around the time I was 13 or 14, I read about people eating them. Like I was cooking insects. So we can go considerably far. Like a lot of what I eat, my behaviors and the things I'm drawn to, for me, they're all normal and natural. They're just
Mm,
things that have been a part of my life logically for a long time.
nice. Well, we can circuit back to mealworms and bugs later on, but with respect to fermentation, when did you first fall for the funk?
One, I was in culinary school. I had some really amazing mentors in my life. One of them was Dr. Lonnie Rader, professor of gastronomy. She was a Harvard Food Fellow, or still is. I guess once you are, you always are. And Lonnie really took me under her wing and fostered this spark I had for all things gastronomy. She was able to kind of funnel me in the directions associated with each branch of the science and the art. And along that journey, I had already started doing a little fermenting of my own and experimenting with meat curing. And I was raising animals and farming at the same time I was in culinary school. So I was getting like this awesome connective product, into practical use. Lonnie was very active in slow food, and I became very active in slow food. 2007, I was a young chef delegate in Torino and gave a presentation, all this stuff. Anyways, Slow Food Hudson Valley, which ended up becoming the co-convivium chair of, we hosted Sander Katz in the Hudson Valley um, for about 2 weeks. And he stayed with Lonnie and he stayed with me. And I was tasked with taking him all over the Hudson Valley. And here I am. I'm in culinary school. I'm doing everything from animal slaughter to making my own prosciutto. I am growing heirloom tomatoes for taste and making my own like ferments and salsas and dried products. And then Sander enters my life. And up until this point, he came and visited us. He was promoting The Revolution Will Not Be Microwaved, which was, I believe, his second-ish book, somewhere in there, about his take on the food system in general. It wasn't a book necessarily about fermentation. He touched on like he predicted to be like this growing movement of cannabis cuisine and all sorts of stuff in that book. And so he was on tour for that, and I had already had Wild Fermentation. Alani had given me a copy, and I was like literally going page by page, making every single thing in that book. So literally, I was about three-quarters of the way through Wild Fermentation when like Sander was like staying with me, and I had to take him from like event to event, and I was his assistant for his fermentation demos. And I would say that is like that catalyst. Interestingly enough, too, at the same time, I was meeting and working with people like Dr. Gary Linkoff, a mycologist. He wrote the Audubon Guide to North American Mushrooms. So like I'm hanging out with Sander, I'm hanging out with Dr. Linkoff, I'm doing all these things in the Hudson Valley. So Sander, I really like kind of pin him as my pivotal, my eureka, my blossom, the start of my budding, whatever we want to term it.
Wow. I had no idea that that was the kind of backstory and that you guys had intertwined so much, quite a while ago, no?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, we're going back to, oh geez, this would be '07, '08 at the latest. And here
Yeah.
we are, it's 2025 at this point.
Yeah. Wild. Okay. Super cool.
Yeah, so and here I'll connect it even further too, because I had met Sander. He was in the Hudson Valley, and then we saw each other at Terra Madre in '07. So that would have been fall of '07. um, I I knew Sander was there. It was huge, huge, shindig. Prince Charles and Vandana Shiva were lecturing about what they do with food, and it was just amazing. But so we found each other. I had just been to a carne de cavallo butcher. So in northern Italy, in the Alps, they love horse, and it's one of my favorite meats. And being an American, I have almost this much exposure to it. So I
Yeah.
found this charcuterie shop, and I had horse bresaola, and I had a little tartare, like a carpaccio thing he gave me. And I had all these different cuts, and I had a fresh steak that I was going to like cook up with some friends later where we were staying. There was a kitchen. And lo and behold, I walk into this lecture, Will Allen from Chicago, and he had this great urban farming network that he promoted. He was giving a lecture. Sandra and I sit next to each other, and I'm like, "You want some horse?" And he was like, "Yep." So we sat there eating horse meat charcuterie with a piece of crusty bread while Will is like lecturing us about like how urban agriculture is the next wave and we need to focus agricultural dollars into urban centers. And anyways, there's my start, my whirlwind start with Sander.
Wow.
From fermenting in the Hudson Valley to eating horse meat in northern Italy.
So Terra Madre is the kind of slow food celebration that happens in Bra, right? Periodically.
Yeah, yeah. So this, they've restructured it from what I understand in recent years, but at this time they would have Terra Madre at the same time as Salone d'Agosto, in Torino.
Got it.
So, yeah, so just a bit north of Bra. The University of Gastronomic Sciences is just a bit south of Bra and right outside of Alba, which is like it's so fat. That university, that's the heart of white truffle. I mean, it's just there's so many cool things going on there. But yeah, so yeah, they would have for Terra Madre. It was a very, I guess, select and pared down group of delegates from different countries, and then anybody could get a ticket to the Salone. And at that time, I think they were saying there was like 25,000 people a day in and out of Salone. And
Wow.
there were probably from the worldwide delegations, I don't know, maybe 2,500 people from give or take 80-ish countries, at that time. I think since they've kind of restructured it and they do a whole separate thing here in North America with our Architaste now. And I haven't been as entrenched with them in recent years, but yeah, it
Yeah,
was
I mean,
nuts.
I love that university is a very special place in the whole area with the wine and the truffle and all of the
And
specialities.
to be in the catacombs underneath, like where the wines are and some of the preserved ruins, it's just like
Yeah.
it's amazing.
So forgive my geographical naivety, but Hudson Valley, that's in New York State, right?
So if the Hudson River enters into the Atlantic Ocean at New York City,
Yeah.
the ocean goes into the river at whatever you want to say, and if you go from New York City, you follow the river up 90 miles roughly, you're in what they call the Hudson Valley.
Got
And the
it.
kind of that stretch north of New York City along the river, and there's beautiful communities on both sides. And that is like the Hudson Valley. When a greater context of the Hudson Valley for those who aren't North Americans and who are American and just don't know this, but there's a whole school of painters named after the Hudson Valley who were well known for 18th century landscape nature paintings, painting the mountains, painting a pine tree in beautiful light and all this. So if you want to get familiar with the Hudson Valley in general, it is just this majestic place. It's one of the oldest settled places in North America when we account for indigenous settlement and the arrival of Europeans, because Manhattan's been inhabited since the 1500s, give or take, by Europeans and peoples much longer before then. So it's just a fantastic, fantastic place. It's one of my favorite in North America. The soil there too, Doctor, it's all glacial carved. So it's really, really high nutrient content. They call it the black dirt region
Mm.
because the soil is almost so naturally high in organic content. It's like compost.
Wow. My next question was, is there agriculture and livestock and the good
And
stuff?
so kind of leading into this being one of the black dirt regions, the other black dirt region in North America is where I live now, along the Great Lakes, both on the north side and the south side, whether you're Canadian, American, indigenous, however you identify. We have this wonderful trail of these glacial soils that were left at the end of the Pliocene. So the agriculture in the Hudson Valley is second to none to any region that is known for its agrarian products, livelihood, and foodways that you would find anywhere else in the world. I mean, it's arguably one of the best in America. The landscape can support many different things. It's a temperate climate, so it doesn't get too hot and it doesn't get too cold, right? So variety of crops from stone fruit to palm fruit, apple orchards, plenty in the apple orchards throughout the Hudson Valley literally date back to the American Revolution. There's a city in the Hudson Valley called Esopus, and there was a apple breeder there named Spitzenberg, and he bred the Esopus Spitzenberg apple. And the conversation, the mythology part of around Thomas Jefferson is that was his favorite apple. And through Jefferson's agrarian sensibilities, we won't get into all the other crazy shit that man did, unfortunately, but through his agrarian sensibilities, the Hudson Valley in America since Revolutionary War times has been known as this agrarian hotbed for some of the finest fruits and vegetables, some of the best cuts of beef, the best pastured lamb, and these sorts of things. It's really, really a fantastic agrarian region.
Wow, I'm getting a history lesson and a geography lesson all wrapped up in one. So you were with Sandor up in the Hudson Valley. Did you navigate back to Ohio and to Cleveland and how did that all happen?
So I ended up, while I was in the Hudson Valley, I got to spend a little bit of time in Italy and travel around and, go all over North America. But my wife and I, we then ventured down to New York City. We were there for a number of years. And then in 2014, we made our way to Cleveland. So I'm from Cleveland. Cleveland is part of what generally people misnomer the Rust Belt. We were built on industrial steel in our factories, and we have great shipping and waterways. So eventually, steel collapsed here. So coming here, I never wanted to come back because I worked so hard to get out of the rustiness and to find other things, experience life in a different dynamic. And my wife, who's from Oklahoma originally, which is in the center of the United States, and Oklahoma, in many respects, is still the stereotypical Americanized Wild West, both in how people live and the arid landscape and all these things. And she fell in love with Cleveland, and she said, "That is where we're going." So that's kind of how we ended up back here. And I can tell you, it's one of the best decisions we've ever made in our lives.
Yeah. And so since you've been there, you opened Larder DB. And weirdly, I followed your various handles for so many years. And it was just like half an hour before this conversation. And I was like, what does Larder DB even stand for? And so I looked, and obviously it stands for Deli and Bakery, right? Tell me about when you started that, and, were ferments and charcuterie and preservation always like part of the blueprint, or did that kind of emerge as you established yourselves?
Yeah, so prior to my wife and I moving to Cleveland, we were kind of brainstorming. We're like, okay, we're moving from New York, we're chefs. We're moving from, and my wife and I, we met in culinary school. She had a culinary degree prior to us meeting at CIA and went to CIA for baking and pastry. So we are both culinary professionals and we're getting ready to move into a new market that's smaller. And we're coming from New York, which is a big, flashy, fancy market. And we've been in Europe and we've been farming and we've been doing all this crazy stuff. Can we just go and open our own place without like anything behind us necessarily? And the decision was like, no, not right away. But we were looking at doing a concept that we called Ohio. That's the state I live in the United States. We were going to call it Ohio Wild. And I would procure rare foraged ingredients from fungi. And nowadays I am a licensed mycologist. So I'm no longer just an aspiring forager, but we would procure these ingredients, the fungi and stuff, and then anything that we weren't selling fresh, Allie would bake into assorted pasties and hand pies and various things. And we wanted to be in one of the open air markets, or the open air market that we have here in Cleveland that dates back to the early 90s. We decided right away that wasn't going to be like the thing. So I started working for another chef in town. He was looking for someone that could ferment and cure meat and not poison people. He personally, right before I was hired, the summer before he hired me, the spring of 14, so the summer 13, he misidentified a fungi and was in the hospital for a few days.
Just
He,
himself or any other?
yeah. Thankfully, it was just himself, and he didn't eat a lot. And it was an omphalota, so what we call the jack o' lantern. It can mess you up. Some people might need dialysis, but once we flush you out good, you recover and there's no long term effect. No neurological, very few gastrointestinal effects. It's really kidneys and liver. So a good flushing, a couple days in the hospital, you're on the mend, you're okay. So he was looking for an individual like me. I was looking for a chef I could work with who would let me just do these things. And right away, John was like, "I need you," and I was like, "I need you," and that went off. So I worked with him for a little bit, and then around 2016 is when Allie and I started having the conversation of, well, the two of us feel as both of us working chefs in this industry, and we don't want to leave the industry, that we're going to have to work for ourselves if we want stability. It can be tough as a chef. There's people underneath you competing for your job all the time and trying to upstage you, even though they're your friends and coworkers. They want your position. So we felt like getting rid of that dynamic for the two of us meant that we would open our own place. And when we examined, my grandmother was a kosher caterer, and I grew up. I was working for her in her kitchens right before my bar mitzvah, so 11 going on 12 years old, doing the luncheons at the synagogue and making the kosher style food, or that was a kosher kitchen actually, doing those sorts of things. And around that time, maybe a couple years before, there was a great book called Deli Man that came out about the collapse of deli culture in North America, and the essentially it's all kind of condensed down into like these venture capitalist owned bland restaurant groups, and not like there's hardly any independent operators. At one time in the island of Manhattan, there was like give or take 1,000 delis, and now there's maybe 2 dozen, and that is with an ongoing revival. So we kind of examined all this. My wife being a baker, my specializations with fermentation, meat curing, her specializations with baking and pastry, and we're like, the delicatessen is the perfect format for us. Irregardless of if I was a Jewish individual or not, and like drawn to Jewish deli culture, this would still. And my wife is of Quebecois and Italian descent. So, like, if we would have traced her family heritage, we would have been like an Italian delicatessen or a Quebecois style. And honestly, I like to think that my pastrami is more of a Montreal smoked meat, in that vein of pastrami's, than some of the more traditional ones out in North America. But that's kind of how it all blossomed. We decided like the delicatessen, and we intentionally use the word delicatessen instead of deli. Hence
Mm,
the Instagram handle Larder DB. Instagram would not let me fit Larder
sure.
Delicatessen and Bakery. It was too long. So we had to shorten it because we don't want to be a deli. And the distinction we make in that, especially in North American deli culture and Jewish deli culture, World War II is kind of the dividing line. So prior to World War II, we had these delicatessens, and aesthetically, they were hued in natural wood and tones. Think wooden barrels, things fermenting, maybe different cured meats hanging around, like you would envision an old world delicatessen. Come World War II, we see the diner and car centric experiences start to be prominent. And with that, the aesthetic of the natural hues, the warm wood, the nature tones, and the paint was flipped, and it became formica with sparkly stuff in it, and stainless steel and neon, and like polyester lined menus instead of maybe something that was handwritten or on a piece of paper. There was this huge movement, and delicatessens felt they had to be more diner esque to
Mm.
keep up with the times, and that was how they modernized themselves. So we kind of decided like we wanted to harken back even to like this time period that would have been, give or take, pre-Civil War in the United States, so about the 80s, up until, all through the main German migration into North America with a lot of German Jews coming. And the German Empire in the 60s was massive. Czechoslovakia, Poland, even parts of Russia were part of it. Like there was many ethnic people that would identify not as German, but would consider themselves German at the time coming over. So huge migration. And then up until about, the Great Depression. the end of the 30s into the 40s in World War II. We wanted to exemplify that time period in aesthetic, in experience, in how the food was produced. Because at that time, they weren't using a lot of massive, intensive industrialized products, right? We've had industrialized foods since antiquity. How do you think the Romans fed each other? How do you think the pyramids were built? There were industrialized grain mills and harvest operations. This has been around for a long time, but it's the intensive mechanized process that we've developed recently that's made a huge difference. So we wanted to harken back to ingredient sets that predated that, crafting techniques, and then at the same time, we have to make things delicious, right? I have to be progressive on the palate if I want to take something that's old and make sure it's deliciously relevant to those eating it now. Because our tastes and change with time, and what we accept as a delicious ingredient or a repulsive ingredient, and vice versa, travels with time and location also. So we had to make sure that we had enough of the old with enough of the modern intertwined, and that's how we ended up where we are now.
Wow. And just to sort of a sidestep for a moment, you're clearly such a lover of history and understanding the roots of whether it's places or people or cultures or the food and the ingredients. Is that for you a kind of active practice, or is this just stuff that you absorb as you go through cooking and
It's a
acquiring
manner of
knowledge?
both. So I think we're adults. We can dive off into the deep end a little bit. I've been sober for many years. I've been sober about 23 years. Actually, just celebrated 23 years, I should say. So I got sober at 19. All through my teens, I've used many, many different substances, but especially amphetamines, and coke and that sort of thing. And I would snort Ritalin and then stay up all night and read a volume in the encyclopedia. And then I would try to go out in the world and like find where I could find all these things I was reading about in each volume and how I could experience them within my given resource set. So for a long time I've just kind of been intertwined. This is just how I work and how my brain works. But I feel to truly understand where we're gonna go, and we really have to start asking where we're going and what the fuck we're doing to the planet and to each other. We have to know where we've been, and we have to know what's worked and what hasn't worked and the reasons for that. And if we want to progress as a species and as a civilization and not destroy ourselves and the resources that underpin our success, we've got to make some good changes, and we have to know where it came from. So this is kind of like the intertwinement. And I feel food is such a powerful thing to get people to have these conversations with, right? We don't necessarily become friends when we sit down and eat together. That doesn't necessarily happen, but at the very least, we'll talk and hear each other out, right? So we kind of have to be able to use food as a vehicle to connect to people, because here's the reality. There is no greater intimate or more sensual experience you will have throughout your given day than when you take something and put it into your body. Because I want you to think of the context of that. We have it as a matter of sustenance and sustaining, and we have it from a context of reproduction, right? Because that's where our brain exists. We need to sustain so we can reproduce. How life works, whether it's us as a species or anything out there, microbes and everything in between. So you daily are doing the most intimate thing that you can do to yourself that not even your partner, your lover, or is doing to you on a daily basis. With that intimate sensual experience comes a lot of responsibility that we've foregone in the modern age with industrialized food practices. So getting people to realize how intimate and sensual of an experience eating and consuming and enjoying food, especially from a hedonistic standpoint, I feel, is the key to having greater conversations about the intricacies and interlinked points between food and everything else that we do. Because nowadays we're taking our food and we're taking it off world to generate atmospheric gases, food itself, structural support. We're going to be taking it to the bottom of the ocean. Like, we are getting all these things out of our food because we're hitting the limits of what we can extract from our inorganic natural resources. So now I feel is like the time and place to really hone in on that intimate sensuality linked to everything else that's happening around us. It can be very powerful too. So That's kind of
Yeah.
why we where I'm coming from with how we approach what we do with food.
Wow, I love that. I mean, so many of us eat very mindlessly these days, and many of us eat alone.
And listen, myself, and there's industrial foods that are like, I love Cool Ranch Doritos. Like, I don't eat them all the time. I have them every once in a while. But listen, some things for hedonism's sake are okay sometimes.
My experience also is that if you try and talk about these big topics, let's say the ways in which the world is sort of fundamentally broken at the minute, and we're all drifting apart and can't understand each other's perspectives. And if you try and talk to people, say, do this, don't do this, you're destined to fail. But if you gather people around a bowl of food or a plate of food, and that food sort of presents some questions, like it's made with something or it's made without something or it has a backstory, then if it's delicious, you can get people curious and asking you the questions, and that leads to much more powerful and sticky conversations in my experience.
Yeah. And if I can say too, like being a restaurant operator, when you first open, there's other places open. Who are you? You're in this sea, right, of businesses. And even now, I don't put the word fermented on my chalkboard menu. We use pickled, because even though there's people that seek us out intentionally for those foods, I still have many people that are coming in and like don't understand the concept of fermented, maybe outside of beer or maybe a general understanding of bread, and don't have the time or the bandwidth at the moment to have a conversation about like, hey, here's why my fermented pickle may be a little bit holistically better for you in the long run than if you ate this one you bought from the grocery store, you know? So even now, there's these challenges. From the beginning, we've had to easily go in with people. Like from day one, I've been using Koji widespread in all our food. If I were to have a conversation with everybody that walked in the door, that like I put the digestive secretions from a mold all over everything you're going to eat.
Yeah.
Like that just doesn't, with people that aren't like you and I, that just doesn't really, like, you're smiling. You'd be like, dude, give me one of everything, right? I saw it in your eyes. But the general populace of people that are coming into a restaurant aren't necessarily coming in for that. So that is a conversation we've had to just kind of build up over the years. And we've had to use things like, instead of our direct communication within the restaurant, like our menu or our people working here, use the social media, do a little bit of explanation. Somebody can like look up something and just like get interested in it before they come in. So we've been huge proponents of being able to just help show people what's out there that they didn't realize was already there. And we don't necessarily view this as we're doing anything new per se. We feel we're just keeping things current. That's
Mm.
all I look at, right? Like a lot codes, the use of filamentous molds in food production dates back to the dawn of agriculture and probably longer. Like we just only have concrete archaeological evidence that puts it at a certain year mark. It takes a long time to notice and develop these natural processes leading up to the evidence we have. These practices could be tens of thousands of years old potentially, you
Yeah.
know? Evidently, we can say they are 10,000 years old. We can definitely put a firm pin in there. So I don't feel that we're ever necessarily doing anything new. We're just keeping it current based on the resources we have now and the understanding we have of the world as it exists now, which that is the one thing that's changed drastically in 10,000 years. At that time, going back, if they had the resources and the understanding of the world that we have now, we'd be way farther along than we are now, even. So we kind of have to like put things into that lens, that context. And like I said, we just think we're keeping it current.
Yeah. So you brought up the K word, Koji. So that's a great opportunity for us to sort of
And
segue
can you read
into.
my shirt, or is it coming through backward?
I could only see the top. I was wondering.
It
Therefore, I
says
am
I've yeah. How great is that? So there's this great clothing company. I'm going to show a plug really quick. We Are Cultured, and I believe they are at We Are Cultured if you look them up
okay.
online or Instagram. But he's a graphic designer and fermentation fetishist, and makes and designs and prints all manner of fermentation wear and it's amazing. So
Yeah, so you obviously you're very well known for this book, Koji Alchemy. Tell me a little bit about how you and Rich first got to know each other, and sort of where and when you decided to do the book.
yeah, so Rich and I were creeping each other on Instagram. Straight up, like, I don't know, he appeared in my feed, and I was like, I like this guy's stuff. And I didn't really know who he was. I hadn't reached out to him yet. He was doing things that he felt were delicious and he really enjoyed, and the people who was sharing with him were like, this is great. And here he is during the day, he's an aerospace engineer who designs ceramic polymers for heat shields for, exiting and entering our orbit. He's like, people listen to me about that when I talk about it, but when I talk about how I'm this guy that uses koji at home and I make miso out of cookie dough, nobody's like connecting the two, you know? So we were interacting online, didn't really know each other. And then this wonderful woman we both know, and I don't know if you've met Cynthia Graber, Gastropod podcast. She's part of the Eater Network now here in North America. Cynthia had written an article about Rich making his smoked cookie dough miso for the Boston Globe. And right after that, America's Test Kitchen, they had a publication called Cook Science at the time. They were hearing about all the koji stuff I was doing. So they sent Cynthia to Cleveland to write an article about koji and, this oncoming thing. And this was, I want to say 2016. And while Cynthia's in town, her and I hit it off. We had a blast and all this stuff. And she's like, do you know who Rich is? And I was like, yeah, I know of, and we've interacted, but I don't, know much more than a profile picture and some nom de plume the guy has. And she's like, you guys would be like best friends. So she gave me his number. And then I texted him and hit him up on Instagram, and he made the connect. We were just off to the races. Literally, I think we were talking daily within a couple weeks on the phone, just like
Yeah,
bouncing ideas off each other and just like, and then it became this, we started shipping each other stuff in the mail, and it became this like, you're my brother from another mother in a different place, like we just were off to the races. And we said to each other, there's no in a Western view, and in the English language specifically, there's no resources that haven't had a ton of shit lost in translation,
yeah,
or what koji is, how to use it, how to grow it, how to, all these things. And we were like, I mean, let's write a book. So we reached out to a couple people. I hit Sander up. I was like, hey, Rich and I we've been doing long form blog posts. We've been doing our own writings. We got a bunch of stuff. He introduced us to an editor. He also wrote a direct letter to who ended up becoming our publisher. And he said, even though I haven't seen the proposal, I think like if you don't pick this up right now, it's a missed opportunity. And within a week, they were like, okay, guys, finish the proposal. We want this, It all happened like very serendipitously, just very natural, interconnected interest led to, us. And we weren't looking to necessarily, like, we didn't think we'd fill the void on the scale we've had. I guess I should say that.
yeah,
We just thought, like, we're going to create this little niche book, and, we'll put it out there. And it just kind of ends up being that, like, interconnectedly, how Rich and I intimately and personally connected with Koji wasn't the way that a lot of people were or even thinking about it. So it kind of just ended up spurring a lot more conversations.
yeah.
So
And I think it's difficult for people who've entered these worlds in the last few years to understand how little written documentation there was out there. It was people DMing like strangers across the internet being like, have you ever tried this? Like, did it work? Was it safe? Did it,
yeah,
was it good?
listen,
Is it worth
I
trying?
remember. Okay, I hope Ariel listens to this. I remember someone smuggling me, like they like snuck it onto their own scanner and copied it. Her first Noma handbook,
Yeah, it's my
because
favorite.
it was top secret in house too. And
Yeah.
I remember someone being like, hey, do you want to look at this? And at that time, her little section, and she had just a couple pages on Koji, and she talked about growing Koji. She talked about miso. I don't know if at that time her Renee were even experimenting with like alternative sources of protein, right? I mean, come on, under a fucking microscope, a protein's a protein. Like we can turn them all into deliciousness, and all into good things from my standpoint with that. But yeah, I remember like seeing that and that being like the resource in English, like that even mentioned Koji, like aside from like Shirtleff's writings, the Book of Miso, the Book of Tofu, and all these things, and he does go into Koji making, but he is documenting traditionalism with how he talks about Koji, and then he kind of gets into some alternative misos and stuff, but like he kind of talks about growing Koji and then leaves it alone. Oh, and
Yeah.
then to just talks about the miso or the sauce. And he's very
Yeah.
focused on tradition and posterity, which is great, right? That's how like I learned about the traditional techniques and stuff. So, but yeah, like there wasn't any, even if we go back like prior to the pandemic, I feel like online fermentation communities were even still fairly insular and closed. And now there's Reddit groups that are, hundreds of thousands of people. And
Yeah.
I'm like, I can't keep up with all of you guys. Half of you, I think, are going to kill yourselves. The other half, I want to eat some of what you got. There's like no middle road going on right now.
Yeah. I went on to Reddit the other day to I guess it's / ferment or fermentation. I'd been on there like 5 years ago and it was a small number of people. And the numbers are crazy these days.
It's
Amazing.
crazy, and I'm seeing like more interconnected. So before, previously, if you were into zymology, right? Like you're either someone who was maybe doing pre-fermentation treatments with enzymes and getting ready to ferment, or you were deep in the rabbit hole of like applied fermentation, right? You didn't have a lot of interlap between enzymatic use and understanding and like applied fermentation.
Yeah.
So like with Rich and I working together and like our brains, we don't look at a difference between like yes, there's different stages and enzymatically different processes that lead to fermentation, and then the enzymatic processes that happen after fermentation and these sorts of things. But for us, we kind of viewed it through like a double lens, right? Like here's one, here's the other. You're wearing the glasses. Rich and I like viewed it through this monoscope layered. So, it was very easy for us to kind of find the ways to be able to explain to people the interconnectedness between enzymes and their fungal derivatives or any enzymatic source, whether it's internal or whatever, and what is happening during fermentation, you know? Because like one is driven by these like crazy types of proteins, right? And to explain to people it's a protein, it's not alive, it's not dead, but it does move around and like cause things to happen. Okay. It interacts with its environment and like explain the difference between that and what's happening and what is happening when a single celled organism, whether it's a bacteria, whether it's animalistic or it's a yeast, a single celled fungi or whatever it is, and what they are actually doing and how they're actually like more like us. They are like biting something and bringing it in their body and then they're flushing out their metabolites. And that's what we enjoy. And we're trying to harvest and we're going after. So, it's really fun to see the shift that more and more people are seeing instead of the glasses, they're seeing it this way. And
Yeah.
I just feel the next few years, the shit we're gonna see is gonna be so awesome.
Yeah, for sure. I've seen that the nuanced understanding of what enzymes are and whether they're dead or alive, etc., versus living microbes is definitely getting clearer in more people's heads. And I totally agree. You have hundreds of thousands of people running in parallel all of these experimentations and explorations now in a way that just wasn't happening.
Well, and not only that, but I will tell you, I can go to my local over 100-year-old open air market, right? They got hanging the meat and hey, you want some? You want strawberries? This and that. What is today? Today is Friday, so they're open. I can go buy fresh cacao pods.
No.
I can buy dragon fruit. I can buy several different varieties of bananas. It's a Friday in Cleveland, Ohio, in
Yeah.
the Rust Belt of America. I have access to those materials. And I also have a copy of the Noma Guide to Fermentation or, The Art of Fermentation or Miso Tempe Natto. Like, so I'm living in a time and place where I literally have unlimited access to resources. I can't
Mm.
always afford them, right? That cacao pod costs 25 bucks. Like that's not a regular buy, but to know that I can literally walk around the corner and buy an ingredient like that and then mix it with some fungal enzymes that source the spores from Japan and like here I am in a steel town in America. Like, do you get what I'm saying? Like each one of us has unprecedented access to both organic natural materials that we can morph and manipulate and accompanying information based on experience of what to do with that thing. And then you can easily deduce what hasn't been done and go ahead and try it. And that is what we're seeing now.
Yeah. It's still actually very difficult to get fresh cacao pods in the UK, so I'm heartened to hear that you can get them in Cleveland. I just to do a tiny bit of bookkeeping just to reference fully the book that you were talking about earlier. So Dr. Ariel Johnson and Lars Williams wrote this thing, which I think is called the Nomus Field Guide to
I
Fermentation.
think so, yes.
It was produced in hard copy on a very small run, but I believe still you can download it for free from Ariel's website, the PDF, and it's very, very, very good.
It's so great. And they have all these like hand drawn little drawings. Oh, God, her and Lars are so fucking brilliant.
Yeah, I think it's Ariel's drawings, I believe.
Oh, that's so great. That's so great. Like, I view her as an ascended human being. Like, she's just a goddess in my eyes. Like,
Yeah.
she's so brilliant and that woman has changed the world in ways that like people will never understand. And it's so beautiful.
Yeah, responsible for a lot of things that lots of people, even maybe quite close to the fermentation story, are not aware of, let's say.
Yeah. And Lars, too, like, I can't tell you if I were to ever relapse, Lars, I'm getting a bottle of empirical. I want some isolated oyster profiles in my gin.
Yeah. Well,
I'll tell you that much.
I'm sure they'd give you just the sort of the tinctures, right? Sans
I
alcohol.
got a rotary evaporator and centrifuges, bro. I guess we're not a regular delicatessen then after
Yeah.
all.
They have, of course, the spicy Dorito flavor, don't they? You'll love
Yeah, maybe I'll maybe check that out. God, I hate myself every time I eat something like that too. This is what I tell people, and I'm not sure how it is in the UK right now with the condensation of the things that people actually eat versus compared to what is actually out there. But the average American only eats like 7 different species, and I think it's like wheat, corn, soy, beef, chicken, pork, and like that's it. That is the majority of the United States American diet. Bro, rotate your proteins. There's duck, there's geese, there's a million different types of seafood. There's this breed of cattle and that breed of cattle. There's lamb, there's goat, there's rabbit, there's quail. Like most people, you could probably go just going to your grocery store. I'm hoping you could go about a week to 10 days and change your protein up source every day. And like
it.
when we do things like that too, is when you eat beef every day, you put pressure on the beef industry every day. When you only eat beef once every 10 days because you're rotating through this other selection of proteins because you're an omnivore and should eat a wide variety of different foods, you know, you are dispersing the pressure you're putting out on industry. And in some cases, some of these industries for food production can have net benefits to the environment and the climate versus some that are having negative consequence. So it's good to like spread your things out. I try to tell people like you're an omnivore, eat a moderate amount of everything. So if you feel like eating a Dorito every once in a while, like it's okay. Just make sure you're eating tons of different fruits and vegetables and proteins and dairy applications and eggs and nuts and seeds and insects and everything that you can get your hands on. People have eaten throughout the course of history. So find your way to enjoy that ingredient.
Amazing. So we'll start sort of wrapping up. I've got one longer form question to ask you, and then we'll do a few short fire ones. But
Yeah.
many people, knowing that the book that you wrote, might feel they know the answer to this. But what microbe has changed your life the most?
You know what? I mean, it's going to be the obvious, but not for the reason people think. Um, I have horrible environmental allergies. Like, I go for like immunotherapy shots for it and everything. Like, and I'm a mycologist and a forager, right? So I'm allergic to every species of like penis and so like all the conifers. If they touch my skin, I get like streaks of hives. Like I am so highly allergic to aspergillus mold. I found out 2 years ago
No.
that like I get contact dermatitis from spores. I'm pre-asthmatic, and I was a smoker years ago, and I still vape, so that's a compounding issue on top of that. I'm relatively deathly allergic to aspergillus. So like I had this epiphany. If you would have asked me before I had my recent allergy tests and all this stuff, I probably would have said Acetobacter,
Yeah.
because as someone in recovery and being a culinarian, I've always wanted to be able to enjoy alcohol without being addicted to it. And I don't have that luxury as some people do. So early on, got into fermentation as a vinegar maker, because I felt at the very least, like, yeah, fine, I've never drank Jack Daniels or whatever, but like you can dilute it and then ferment it. Like these were the early things that I was messing with fermentation wise. So if you would have asked me this crazy cosmic love hate relationship I have with aspergillus, apparently from like a physiological standpoint,
Yeah.
previously I would have said Acetobacter, because it
Wow.
allowed me as a culinarian to experience alcohol in a way where alcohol wasn't involved, but I could still focus on enough of the flavor characteristics. Some body transfers into a vinegar and texture, tannins and those things can be carried over. So it really allowed me to have a holistic view of how to pair alcohol, how to cook with it, and those sorts of things.
A lot of vinegars can have a very small percentage of alcohol residual. Are
Mhm.
you like extra careful? Do you sort of run tests on the alcohols you
It
produce, or you
it
with them?
Listen, if it's hot enough, I don't worry about it. And
Yeah.
some vinegars where I'm carrying over sugars and that sort of thing, I'm intentionally like, of course, there's always going to be residual. If I don't pasteurize it, it'll be continual, like all these different things. But me, it's kind of like a case by case basis. The aroma of red wine, it almost doesn't matter what red wine it is, gives me a craving.
Yeah.
And the taste of brown spirit. So, like, if I eat a barbecue sauce that somebody put a whiskey in or something, that will induce a craving physiologically in me. So, over the years, I've like worked with alcohol in various capacities, but I've always felt that the vinegar was enough of a transformation where it wouldn't bother me. And vinegar made from red wine, vinegar made from these brown alcohols, and that sort of thing, I have no issue with and no problem with.
Yeah.
But then like clear alcohols, white wine, like those things aromatic don't induce a physiological craving in me, or that addictive craving. So I don't know, like it's weird how all this stuff works, right?
Yeah.
I
Well,
gotta
yeah.
I gotta go in like an MRI machine and like sniff different alcohols and find out why one's inducing a craving in me versus another, right? Like it's fucking
Yeah.
nuts.
Well, yeah. Look, well done on, and long may it continue your sobriety journey.
Well, thank you, man.
I'm also curious about the allergy test. Did you have an inkling, and did you go to your doctor and say, "Look, can you test for this specific thing?" Or they do an Aspergillus test now?
I've since I was a little kid, I've been medicated over the years. And when I was a kid, the medications I used to take were all prescription. But eventually, by the time I was like in my early 20s, all of those medications have been made over the counter in the United States. So I went from like seeing an allergist to them being like, well, you can get like you don't have to visit me anymore. And then finally, my wife made me go again. 40 years old. Get a full blown test, and I had to have epinephrine administered because they thought I was going to go into shock from my environmental test. So I guess when you have a violent reaction to 65 allergens at once, it can induce that much as eating can with certain things. So
It was payback from all of the abuse you've put these microbes through over the last 20 years.
yeah, yeah. Like I've known my whole life I'm horribly allergic to stuff, and I've always taken Benadryl. I've taken Benadryl almost daily since I was a teenager before bed, and so it's always been there. But finding that through, a medical doctor who's testing me for it, I was like, okay, there we go. I've built my career being a mycologist, a forager, and fermenting food with filamentous molds, and literally everything that I touch is trying to kill me.
Yeah. Wow. All right.
Yeah.
And we'll finish with a few quick fire questions.
Yes.
If you weren't doing the job that you currently do, what would you like to do?
I would like to examine inorganic sciences and arts. Metallurgy would be something, cutting gems, maybe glass blowing, something in that realm.
Nice. Well, as a material scientist, I wholeheartedly approve of that. Um, what profession would you not like to do you think?
I'm numerically dyslexic. Anything with numbers, which is like, I mean, the work I do now, half of it's on paper, looking at equations and figuring out percentages and stuff. But yeah, anything where I would be responsible for the accuracy of somebody else's numbers, I do not want to do that. Accounting, finance, anything. Yeah.
So you got to stay away from Rich's aeroplanes, right?
Do I ever? Do I ever?
I mean, this is a bit of a tough one, but do you have any favorite fermented things that you've ever eaten or made yourself?
I absolutely love the kosher dill pickle we make here at Larder. We use carrots. They never get soggy. They're always crispy. I have access to them in my growing zone year round. And then I flip it over to green tomatoes when those are in season. So I really love that.
Do you have any favorite drinks of water throughout your life? Any sips of water that just did something?
So I can tell you, I have those sips repeatedly whenever I'm out in the field working with wild fungi and plants and stuff. I keep little portable water filters on me, and I don't carry water with me anymore because it's really heavy and it's cumbersome to bring with you out in the field and all this. So I rely on these brilliant. There, these water filters. I mean, you can stick them in a petroleum contaminated puddle and drink clean water through them. And the most of them filter up to 100,000 gallons. So I'm outside all the time. I'm always getting to like dip my little water straw in like this little creek or a river near me, and there's always perfection in that exact moment, right? I'm thirsty, I'm into the scene, and like that pure natural water, right? That's as close as I can get to unadulterated water in the 21st century is always it.
Wow. How long does it take to filter?
It's literally like you can suck on it like a straw. It's like, yeah, it uses a series of micron filters that pretty much eventually just let water pass and nothing
That's
else.
cool.
Somebody developed them about 30 years ago to help out in places in Africa where running water, like you may have to try to find a way to clean feces and, pathogenic contaminated water source. And
Yeah.
I've never gotten sick with them. I'm still going in some pretty crazy shit too.
What's the name of the brand and how much does it cost roughly?
I've used two over the years that I've liked equally. One is called Sawyer, Sawyer water filters, and the other one is called Life Straw.
Hmm.
And they run about $20, maybe
Wow.
30. Yeah, like I said, they were designed, I believe the whole idea went through like a United Nations relief program for clean water usage. And I implemented that, and people were ready to recoup their humanitarian investment. And like now I can buy one, right? So I think that's the idea behind them, and just keeping them affordable so that my purchase of one at $30 could potentially subsidize a couple that they're giving to someone in a water stressed area who needs to clean water but doesn't have a water treatment plant.
Very cool. Final quick fire question. And what's your idea of happiness these days?
You know what? Anything with my kids. That's it. I woke up this morning, my 3-year-old, she wanted to jump on the bed. So we jumped on the bed for a little bit. That's it. I'm just I got so much crap to deal with, otherwise. And there's so much going on in the world that I'm like, my kids, if you guys want to go have fun, let's go have fun.
Just finally, any sort of, we spoke about Ariel and Lars's amazing book. Any other resources, and obviously Koji Alchemy, your book, which I recommend everyone get. Any other resources that you'd recommend to people out there, whether it's on the mycology front or fermenting, cooking, whatever?
Yeah. I really love a lot of the work that's been done with like flavor equating. So like the flavor equation is great. I'm a huge fan of resources that can teach someone how various ingredients are intertwined. I think it's Eliza Green. She wrote a book called Ingredients. It's this huge, and it's not a deep scientific dive. It's just an encyclopedic listing of everything from A to Z. And like, what do you do with an artichoke? And here's a couple recipes if you've never experienced it. She gives you tips for buying from the grocery store and all that stuff. I think that's absolutely wonderful. This is in North America. This is what I tell a lot of people right now. And this is unfortunately is changing at a pace we've never seen before. But we have a great network of agricultural land grant public universities. And in my state, in Ohio, it's Ohio State University. And these are the people that get all the agricultural dollars from the government and work with everybody from a small farmer to the worst of the industrial CAFOs, right? And in between, they in the United States are the supreme resource because part of their mandate through taxpayer funding is to hold classes on things like canning, introductory sauerkraut making, and low level fermentation processes. Some of them even do classes on meat curing. All of these agrarian ways that are tied to agriculture and traditional food production. Almost anyone in America can find free classes held by their county extension office. These are offered and they legally have to offer them. So like I tell people oftentimes to like go back and find this resource. Like a lot of us live in cities now, so we don't understand how these programs were set up and they still exist, to cover everybody, no matter if you're in the city or the countryside. So if you are in the United States, seek out your state agricultural university. It'll often be named after your state in a lot of cases. Iowa State University, Ohio State University, that sort of thing. And find out, go to their website, online classes, in-person workshops. Some of them you'll go to a canning class that they're hosting for free, and they'll send you home with a pack of mason jars too, and like the Ball Blue Book to Canning. So like
Yeah.
there are these awesome public resources. So I'm not sure in other countries, in their agriculture departments, if you have similar resources, but in the United States, it is really, really great. It's fantastic. And so many people have no clue that this even exists.
Yeah. Okay, amazing. Well, if you want to follow Jeremy's work, you
And
can go to,
can we plug your book?
yeah, of course.
Resources for Fermentation. You want
You can
to,
plug it for me.
it's Adventures in, right? Because I saw like a working title. I want to make
Yeah,
sure when I give you a plug for here in the North American, make sure we get the title right.
yeah, Adventures in Fermentation.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So please go out and buy a copy of Adventures in Fermentation. It's this new book from Dr. Johnny Drain, and it will give you the most amazing, intimate experiences that you can have with fermentation through his eyes, and then go have them yourselves. Get a copy. It's fantastic.
And you're saying that as someone who's read it, right? We got a quote from you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've read it. I'm not just like throwing that out there. I'm like, come on, man. We might as well plug your shit on your podcast.
Thanks so much. I appreciate that. You can follow. I also have to ask you again. I followed you for, I mean, over a decade probably. But where does TM Gastronaut come from?
So when I was in culinary school, I became really, really close friends with a chef named Jorge Hernandez. Jorge was a chef at Minibar, was at Obui, worked with Jose and Ferran for a long time. And we were like best buddies all through culinary school. And now he's down, do you know Kevin Fink? Down in Austin, Texas. Jorge is working with Chef Fink and like their whole restaurant group now doing amazing things in Texas. We're sitting around in school one day. I think we were in gastronomy class, and he looks at me. I don't know. I'd asked like some what everybody thought was off the world question, which I thought was completely logical. And, the whole course of the lecture shifted, and he looks at me and he goes, "I'm anointing you the mighty gastronaut." And that's, I refer to him as Dr. Gastronaut. There's a few of us others from culinary school, but yeah, so that's kind of where that comes from.
So you're the mighty G, the mighty gastronaut. Wow. Okay, I've
That's
learned so
it.
many things today.
That's it. And Jorge, we had this conscious conversation of like, what is a gastronaut? Like, if we were to like look at this essence of that compared to a gastronome, right? And like, I just commonly like to tell people that the gastronomes didn't really like to share. They didn't like to like share their secrets. They wanted you to like buy and pay for their things, but they didn't want to share what they were doing and how they were creating it and put it out there. They were leaving that for you to figure out. As gastronauts, we're kind of like going out. Like you can see us exiting. We're not going underground like a little gnome and hoarding everything, right? We're like going out and we're broadcasting everything that we're finding out to you because we want to share it with you. So like philosophically, like Jorge and I were like having this discussion of like, well, what is gastronomy as we're entering the 21st century and examining how the intersect of intensive technology affects gastronomy? Because up until that point, up until roughly, the flip of the 20th century, there were still things that were just like dreams out of realities now. It's accelerated at pace. So we wanted to make sure that the love of gastronomy, this whole idea and concept of terroir, because it does apply to everything, not just grapes, anything of the land influences, these factors influence. So we wanted to make sure that like people could be a gastronaut, that they could sail away, that they could explore things however they wanted to within food.
So we all have to be gastronauts, not gastronomes.
I mean, that's pretty much what it comes down to. God, so many native French speakers are going to stab me now.
Jeremy, thank you so much for your time today. It's been brilliant talking.
I've been so flattered to be on. And one of these days I'm gonna get you in Cleveland. We're gonna loop
Yeah.
you in.
I've been there once, and it was because my plane got delayed, and so I spent a night, and I went to a bar called Johnny's, or it might even be called Johnny D's.
Yeah, it's
Is it
Johnny's
Johnny's or Johnny
downtown.
D's? Yeah,
I
and I
think it's
saved them.
yeah, they're still around. They've been around for a long time.
And I saved a little matchbox, and I had it up on a wall for many years. Yeah. So
Well,
anyway,
listen,
I'm due
we're gonna
another visit.
bring you're due a visit. We're like, dude, I'm gonna feed you till you pop.
Okay, I'm coming over, man. I'm coming over.
All right, we
All
got
right.
places for you to stay the whole deal, man.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jeremy.